If he played the way he played that year, all the other years up till now, then like I say, you'd have seen an incredible amount of tournaments won.
Well, it's sort of like a big three, and then sort of a kind of guy on the side who's like, "Hey guys, can I join? I've got two Olympics,
No,
guys." That's what got me into tennis in the first place. The kind of just the style and the elegance with which he played. I mean, you can see a lot of players who are on the tour now had modelled their game a lot on what he did.
if I were younger and I were looking at Zverev and thinking, "Oh, I quite like him," that would have put me right off.
Welcome back to the Getting a Grip podcast with your co-hosts Ben and Merlin. Again, thousands of miles apart. How are we doing, Merlin?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. Tell you what, it's been a long week, but another interesting week in tennis. And well, as we've seen, there's a lot of drama to talk about, which we love. Gives us content.
Gives us content, it does. So as per usual, we'll round up the latest kind of news in tennis for the last week or two. I think the most appropriate place to start is with the man himself, Andy Murray, notching up his 700th ATP win yesterday at Indian Wells, overcoming Taro Daniel, the guy who overcame him in the Australian Open. I'm sure he probably would have preferred it to be the other way around. But
He's overcome him for the second time out of 3 encounters this year. I think that's the incredible part about this one.
Oh, I didn't even know that. But I'm sure he'd rather have had that win at the Australian Open rather than Indian Wells. But you take what you can get. So
Exactly.
What are our thoughts on kind of Murray's position in the kind of the world order, shall we say? I know we've talked about the big three before, or I think you prefer to refer to it as the big four.
Thank you.
This kind of, I suppose, this cements his status a bit more in that big four, if we're talking about it in kind of general historical terms.
Oh, big time.
So what are your thoughts on kind of, where he's at the moment, and obviously teaming up with his old coach Lendl again, back with his ex. You can never go back too many times.
Yes, I think it's good news. First of all, that he's back with Lendl. I think obviously there was news that came out that he admitted himself in interviews that even under Lendl he probably trained too hard, and I think that obviously that's an issue. I think, as you rightly said as well earlier, as we were talking about this, that Tony Nadal even said that he was training too hard under Lendl, and I think when you've got probably one of the world's toughest tennis men telling you that you're training too hard, I think that, well, it shows how good that self-motivation is, but and shows what a character Murray is, but also tells you probably need to slow down just a little bit. But no, I think it's good news. I think Lendl developed his game, changed his game monumentally during the time that Murray was he's the top of the world, and Lendl was in charge during that unbeatable season that Murray had. That 1 year where Murray won everything, and capped it off with that ATP Tour Finals win as well. So yeah, like I say, it's just good news in many ways.
Yeah, I remember watching that season unfold in 2016, thinking, but this guy could go on to win like many Grand Slams. He got to the final of the French Open. I think, did he win? I don't know if he won the first set, but he was right in that final against Djokovic. And then I don't know, just see, as in many finals against Djokovic, he seemed to just like run out of steam almost when he missed his chance. I think at the end of the first or second set, it just seemed to deflate him mentally. But yeah,
I think we've always known that Murray has had less of the mental game compared to Djokovic, though.
Yeah, I mean, but that's not actually much of a criticism, really, because Djokovic's mentality is, elite. Like him and Nadal, probably you would say, got the strongest mentality of any tennis players, maybe in the history of the game. Time. But yeah, that 2016 season was just incredible from Murray. It feels like doesn't feel that long ago, but at the same time, it's been like 5 or 6 years. I actually remember the start of the 2017 season thinking, again, that he could rack up like at least a couple of majors in this season. And I actually spoke to, I don't know if you know this Sky Sports pundit, Barry Cowan, but I bumped into him in the airport. I think this was before like the Qatar Open or whatever it is, Doha Open,
Oh yeah.
and we were discussing this and thinking, yeah, it's going to be like him and Djokovic are just going to dominate this year. And then,
Mm.
lo and behold, obviously he had that injury in the background, and then it all came to its head in Wimbledon in that quarterfinal against Sam Querrey, and then 4 years have passed since, and he's still on that road to recovery, I suppose, if you'd call it that.
Well, this is it. I think if it weren't for the injury, then we'd have seen Murray really racking up some numbers, not only to become one of the greatest of all time, but to really rival, the big three before him, as it were. But that, like I say, that's provided all goes well in terms of injury. Because if he played the way he played that year, all the other years up till now, then like I say, you'd have seen an incredible amount of tournaments won. And he's a very clever individual. He's a very clever sportsman, Andy Murray, because he learns from what's gone before him. His at the start of his career, he built and he built and he built, and that, like I say, that all led to that impressive year. But unfortunately, that training probably led to an exacerbation of that injury. So potentially, it might have not been as bad if he hadn't trained as hard. But at the same time, like that injury did persist. I believe he admitted that injury persisted, long before that year as well. It was something that was very, very much putting away in the background. But
Yeah,
there you go. Like,
I wanted to kind of ask you about his general style of play. Obviously, it's brought him amazing success. So it's hard to
the
question
ultimate
it really.
grinder.
Yeah, but it is like clearly it takes a massive toll on your body, and especially the way he does have a similar style to Djokovic, but obviously the way they actually move is very different. Murray's there's a lot more impact on his joints, specifically his kind of hip area with that like sharp change of direction. So I was just wondering, like, do you think can he still have success with that style of play now, given the kind of the metal hip that he's got, or does he need to change his style to be a little bit more aggressive? And if he does, is he actually going to do that? Because he obviously loves to play that style of game so much. That's kind of what brings him satisfaction, is being able to grind opponents down. Does he need to change that style of play? And if he does, will he even want to do it?
Well, I think when you're comparing the movement of Djokovic versus Murray, I think your key aspect is the ability to slide or to stop. Murray likes to stop, much more of a hard impact on the joints.
That's
Whereas
how I
obviously
like to
when you see
stop. That's how I like to
Djokovic,
do it.
I'm
I
exactly the
can't
same.
slide.
But
I'm scared to do it. Like,
but
injure
that's
myself if I
it.
do it.
We were raised and we have played, especially in the UK, and this might be very much Murray's shortfall here as well, on a hard court where you can't slide, and if you try to slide, you're probably going to lose an ankle or something. So this is the difference. Whereas you see Djokovic sliding around the court on most occasions, it is a technique in itself, and it gives you some great images. Like I say, the acrobatics that Djokovic is capable of and his agility is incredible. But Murray's just not that sort of player, and like I say, whilst you might want him to change it, in aid of preservation of his hip, I'm not necessarily saying he needs to learn to slide more. He just needs to shorten the points, which is something you've seen Nadal and Federer have a good go at in the later stages of their careers. It's perfectly doable, and like a champion like Murray, he's going to find a way to make something work if he knows that that's what he needs to do. But I think he feels comfortable playing in that same style as he always has, even with his new resurfaced hip. And if he's comfortable playing at that level and playing that style of game, then you've got to hand it to him as the professional tennis player who knows his body better than anyone. Then you've got to hand it to him that that's the decision he's going to make. Also, on this point as well, if I have to listen to another commentator say Andy Murray rolling back the years as he's winning a tennis match, I'm going to have some real issues. I understand he's come a long way in his recovery, and I know he's not at his best that he's ever played, but rolling back the years, no. Don't ever discount Murray. Don't ever take him out. He will always be a threat.
Yeah, I think maybe it's the commentators sort of wishing that they could take themselves back to that time where,
I wish.
he Djokovic, Nadal, and Federer were all going at it, and they were all in, like top physical shape. But it's just not realistic anymore. Sadly, age does catch up with us all.
Indeed.
Yeah, I think actually that is a good point you make about the style of play. Maybe it's not necessarily switching from just being an all-out kind of grinder to just straight-out aggression. It's more just tweaking his game a little bit to cut the point short where he can. Because you've obviously seen that with Nadal. Like he still has that game at the baseline where he's got that consistency and that ability to mentally wear down his opponent. But he's coming to the net a lot more, cutting the point short, and I think Murray has got the volleying game. Certainly, you've seen it in doubles. He's won. Obviously, he won Queen's doubles, and he's a fantastic doubles player and volley.
That was fresh out of the recovery as well.
Exactly. So that is certainly like a tactic that could work for him, and I think I'd imagine you see that'll happen more, especially with him teaming up with Lendl and going through that kind of like training block in America over the next few months. I'm hoping that's what we see, and I think leading into Wimbledon, because obviously he's skipping the French Open or the clay court season. That's the style that's going to give him the best chance, I would have thought.
Well, that's another aspect of it. You cut the points short, but you also cut your season shorter. You reduce the amount of tournaments you're participating in. You pick and choose what you like. And Federer sort of championed this idea, I suppose, at the top of the game and picking and choosing what you want to play and where you want to focus your attention on. But let's take the clay season, for example. That is grind central. Murray loves a grind. Even that might be too much for his body, especially when he's picking the tournaments that he's going to really want to play and make a deep run, hopefully, in the grass court season. And let's face it, as a British fan, that's what we're really looking for.
Yeah, I think he's basically doing the opposite of what Nadal's going to do. I think Nadal's going to go all in on the clay court season, as is his want, as is appropriate. And then Murray will, obviously Murray's
number 15.
That. Yeah, number 15. And then obviously probably skipping the grass court season. As we said,
better news for Murray.
Yes, because he's definitely going to win Wimbledon. I don't know, like if he gets some solid consistency in terms of tournaments in the lead up to it, who knows? Like I think even
it could happen
if he can get to like the fourth round or quarterfinal stage, then it's anyone's game really, because obviously he's been there and done it before and he's got that experience. Then who knows? Don't rule anything out.
Exactly.
Especially given Nadal is literally like unbeaten already at the start of this year, which as we said before, hardly anyone or no one saw coming. Okay, so let's move on to another one of the big four. I'll keep calling it the big four just to make you feel good. No, I agree with that. Well, it's sort of like a big three, and then sort of a kind of guy on the side who's like, "Hey guys, can I join? I've got 2 Olympics, guys, and 3 Grand Slams."
More than the others.
True. Yeah, he's got that over them, at least. Yeah. Okay. So Federer, he is obviously the elderly statesman of the big four. And he's been off out of the tour since he got bageled in that horrible match that was against who was it? Herbert. I can't even say his name correctly. Hurkacz. Right. Okay. That's definitely the correct Polish pronunciation that we've got there. That horrible quarterfinal, was it, against Hurkacz, and we haven't seen him since then. And obviously he must have been dealing with the injury at that time as well, which is kind of horrible. But you can't really talk about it while you're in the tournament, because then everyone just thinks, oh, you're making excuses and all that. And fair enough for kind of keeping it under wraps. We haven't seen him since then, which is, how many months is that now? It must be maybe 8 months or something. A long time,
last year.
A long road to recovery. But clearly he's still got the motivation and drive to come back. I'd imagine seeing what Nadal's doing is definitely going to give him a little spark there. As much as they're kind of more on friendly terms now than maybe in the early years of their careers, he definitely, that still lights the kind of competitive fire in his belly. So he's still, he's got that motivation to come back and go through that long rehab again, which is, he's gone through multiple now. I think most notable was probably that 2016 injury when he came back and then came straight back in and won the Aussie Open at the start of 2017. But I think it's only going to get more difficult as the years go on. So yeah, he's just come back on court, I think. Only playing with his wife, but it's something. I think you could probably relate to that. Playing many games of tennis with your girlfriend, there's a lot to be said for that. So it's looking like, unfortunately, he is going to miss Wimbledon. Clearly, if he could avoid that, then he would. But it must be a serious rehab that he's going to go through if he can't make it back for Wimbledon. How do you kind of see his year playing out when he comes back? It's really hard to predict, isn't it? But do you envisage him being able to win any more tournaments, like on the ATP tour at least, or is this it now? He's going to come back and compete, and then realise that his chances of winning a tournament are, quite slim, and then maybe just call it quits come Wimbledon next year, maybe.
I think it very much depends on the physical recovery. For example, with Murray, Murray's had one of the most major surgeries possible in the game, and he's come back and been able to play at a high level, not making necessarily deep
that documentary
runs.
was grim, wasn't it?
It is grim, and it's heartbreaking as well, because you see how much someone wants it. But in order to avoid going too far back into the Murray topic, I think if Federer emulates the same level of recovery, then I think there's a good chance that he'll make some, the occasional deep run in a tournament perhaps. But I'm not so sure we're talking about, given his age, obviously a lot older than Murray in terms of a sportsman. I think that we're thinking that it could possibly be the end in terms of winning tournaments, but not necessarily the end in winning matches. Again, it's you can never write a champion like Federer out. So I think it will very much depend on how far back to what we'll say is normality he can get his physical recovery to.
I'm sure I can speak for like most tennis fans when we say we want him back. Like his style of play is, well, from a personal perspective, that's what got me into tennis in the first place. The kind of just the style and the elegance with which he played. I mean, you can see a lot of players who are on the tour now had modelled their game a lot on what he did. Especially, like obviously
big time.
Dimitrov's an obvious example, but there are many. You see a lot of one-handed backhands around the tour these days, and that's no coincidence. So yeah, we'd all love to see him back and competing, especially. We don't want to see something like that end of that Wimbledon quarterfinal where it was just like this isn't the Federer that we know. Like this just doesn't feel right. How can our champion of Wimbledon getting like almost demolished or embarrassed, whatever you want to call it, on centre court? It's just doesn't feel right. So yeah, we all want to see him back and being able to at least go on like one or two runs in a tournament. I think he does tend to struggle a little bit in the earlier rounds, as most players do. Obviously, especially if you've not done any kind of major tournaments in the build-up to it, it takes a couple of matches to really kind of get into a groove. Once he gets through those kind of early rounds, he is capable of really going on a good run, and especially like we saw that when he came straight back from the injury in 2016 into that Aussie Open, and once he got going and past those first few rounds, it was like watching vintage Federer again. Not saying that's going to happen this time, but he is capable of that kind of run.
I think from what you said, there's two key points coming out of that, and I think the first of which is, like as I was saying about physical recovery, if he can make it back to some sense of normality to get the match practice, as you're saying, then we're going to see a resurgent Federer, but. And the second point I was going to mention, I think at some point we have to let go. The tour needs to survive any one individual or any four individuals or any three individuals, depending on how we're going with rating, obviously, those top players. So, like tennis will endure even when they are not playing. They may be commentating, they may be coaching, that'll be great, and that will be great stuff to see as well. But we do need to turn our focus onto these newer players as well. And to be honest, I think that might lead to some of the frustration. Who can get a crowd going when all the crowds are supporting all the vintage players?
Yeah, I think the previous generation of fans may have, I don't know if they would have felt similar when you had like the likes of Agassi and Sampras coming in towards the end. That kind of legacy moment almost where Federer defeated Sampras at Wimbledon. and everyone was like,
Mm.
this is it. This is the changing of the guard. It feels like it's been a lot more protracted than that this time, because the longevity of these players these days is so much greater than it was previously. So it's like they're managing to get the most out of themselves even into their mid to late 30s, and you've got these younger guys who are now not actually that young by kind of like traditional standards. They're in their mid 20s, maybe late 20s now, still really kind of battling to take that mantle on. So that's not helping in terms of that transition of fans from those vintage players, as we call them, to this kind of new generation. But yeah, I think you're right. We do need to let go, and I think we've had plenty of time to kind of get our head around this now. Like, these guys are kind of, I don't know, the final stretch of their career, whatever. It is kind of being elongated, but we know that the end is going to come relatively soon. And I mean, people need to kind of find their new champion, if you like, amongst these kind of new generation of players. It is sad though. Like, I mean, it's gonna be so sad to see the day when Federer retires. Like, it's like a piece of your childhood almost, like, right there. And it's gonna be sad, but it will happen relatively soon, I'd imagine. So you need to kind of prepare.
The passion with which you're speaking about Federer suggests you feel about him the way I feel about Murray. So
yeah, there you go. Everyone's got their allegiance.
Everyone's got their champion. Yeah, everyone's got their champion.
And even now, when I'm watching Nadal have an amazing start to the year, I'm like, my kind of, I don't know, not necessarily respect, because I've always respected him, but my admiration for him is growing. But I still feel like every time he wins a tournament, I'm like, it's like almost like a front against Federer. I'm like, this hurts me, even though Nadal is like an amazing player and I respect him like so much and can understand why he has loads of fans. It's just, everyone's got their allegiance, haven't they? Everyone's got to sit in one kind of tribe or camp. But yeah, we got to find new ones. I don't really. I
think that's a topic for another day.
Yeah,
that's a topic for another day. Is who is going to be our new champion? I think we can certainly have a nice spread of players. I mean, for me, a young Canadian is potentially the front runner.
Yes, I like.
And that's the hint you're going to get. That's the hint you're going to get.
I think I might be in the same camp as you there. If we're thinking about the same person, this might be a bit.
It depends. It depends. We've got a couple of young Canadians coming up, haven't we? So true, true. I'm a happy bunny about that.
That's for a future episode. Yeah. One of the front runners, if you like, or one of the more well-known names of that new generation is a Mr. Alexander Zverev. Got himself into a little bit of hot water recently, with the small matter of smashing an umpire's chair, of which he's now described as the biggest mistake of his career and the worst moment of his life. I mean, I don't know whether that's
a fair statement.
I don't know whether worst moment of your life is accurate.
No, I think that's a fair statement.
Yeah, I think it's a fair statement.
I think when you're talking about, so what we were literally just discussing will be a topic for a future episode. When fans are looking at players and looking at all of these next gen people coming through, I mean, they're not even next gen really at the moment. They're just they're consolidated as like the stable few on that top 10 of the tour. But if I were younger and I were looking at Zverev and thinking, oh, I quite like him, that would have put me right off. So I think they need to be very aware that these sorts of tantrums and these sorts of outbursts, whilst I'm not saying that the big four in the old day, they didn't have them, especially in their early stages of the career. I don't know, you used to remember Murray. He used to be screaming and swearing all the time when he was younger.
It did my head in. I was like, is this guy ever going to learn to keep his emotions?
Keep a lid on it, yeah. And he really struggled, yeah. So and even Federer in his early days, and people were very easily forgetting
you're right.
About Federer as well. He was exactly the same. He really struggled to keep a lid on his emotions in the early days, and that's stardom. But they have to be careful because you have a camera on you at all times, especially these days. So I think someone like Zverev, to describe that as a big mistake of his career is correct, and I think that's fair because it certainly makes me look at him slightly differently.
Yeah, I think I mean, there's always tantrums, isn't there? I remember, like, I think maybe it was Eugenie or someone like that. He used to just like smack his head against his racket, and Murray did the same thing. Like, and he'd start bleeding. You're like, yeah, you might have taken it a bit too far here.
But take Djokovic for example at the US Open last year. Hitting a ball really hard. You don't know what's going to happen. So you do have to. I know it's tense, it's pressure. You can't expect people to act perfectly admirably all the time. But at the same time, if you're in the top 10 in the world and you're on the front stage all the time, maybe you should have to act admirably at all times. The same goes for Nalbandian all those years ago
I was just
at
going to
Queen's.
say, yeah. Oh, that was horrible, especially because of the nature of that injury was just very gory.
Exactly. Yeah, so take David Nalbandian, for example, in that final. I think this was against Marin Cilic. Nalbandian was actually up. He was winning. He had a little tantrum. He decided to kick. Basically, they had these little boxes around the lines judges' chairs. He decided to kick that box, thinking it was probably more stable than it was.
Yeah, just
that obviously went straight into the line judge's leg and gave him quite a nasty gash. Rightfully so. Regardless of the scoreline being in Nalbandian's favour, he was disqualified and Cilic won Queen's as a result. So,
yeah, like it's understandable to have frustrations, but you have to. The thing that annoys me is just when people don't learn. Like you can still have that fire in your belly, but be able to keep it somewhat in check. Like I don't mind players, throwing on the racket on the floor like that. That's okay. Like a couple of times, that's fine. Just don't like smash an umpire's chair or like hurl your tennis racket where you have no idea where it's going. Things like that are just a bit too.
I've got to disagree. Actually, I think even hurling a racket at the floor, I think that's too much. And I'm not saying you can't show emotion. We all need to show that we're human, especially these top players, because it gives people more of a perspective related to their own game and their own everyday experience of tennis. But for example, you've got a grass court. Take a grass court, for example, a grass court season. People work very hard all year round to make sure that that's one of the best grass courts on the planet and that it's almost perfect as a surface. So you make a dent in that, then it makes a difference. I say, this is it. So I think you have to be careful of that sort of thing. I'm a big fan of whacking my racket against my shoe. That doesn't really hurt anyone.
We'll say that's acceptable. We'll say that's acceptable and maybe just like breaking it over your knee or something, like Stan's done in the past. Like that.
Wow, yeah. That was quite incredible. It also happened during the Davis Cup finals, or no, not maybe Davis Cup anyway. It was a British player that did exactly the same thing. Made it look effortless. It's ridiculous.
It's almost like a low key flex. You can just like bend your racket like that. It's weird.
It's not bend. He snapped it in half.
Weird alpha move that. But anyway,
yeah.
So yeah. You can get emotional, but just like try and keep it under a little bit of a lid and try and just like learn from these kind of moments. Otherwise, it just does my
absolutely.
Head if people don't learn from these things. Time for a bit of tennis trivia. Maybe the most dull quiz name in the history of tennis quizzes, but we'll go with that for now.
It's early days of this podcast, Ben. I reckon we can come up with a better name and bring it to our viewers soon enough.
We're at the grassroots. Anyway, this week it's 5 questions for me, so it's time for a bit of payback, I think, for Merlin. Let's see
it's time for some payback.
Here we go.
Well, I actually realised from last week that some of the questions you gave me weren't that bad at all. Problem is, I don't really have a great deal of knowledge from previous generations. I keep up with current quite a lot, but I don't study the history books. Speaking of which, some of today's questions might take us back a few centuries. So,
sorry, what? Centuries?
Oh yes.
I mean, I don't think that's quite fair. I should have put some guidelines in place for this. God.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about who won Wimbledon in 1879. No, that is a joke. That is not going to be the case. Do not worry.
In which case, I'm finished and I give up.
I reckon you'll be absolutely fine, but what I've tried to do is create some questions that it's niche knowledge, but I think this is something that everyone pays well to know. So 5 questions.
Is that what your teacher says when you're about to go into an exam that you're ill prepared for? It's going to be fine. Yeah.
It is going to be fine. It is going to be fine. Anyway, so 5 questions. If you get them right, then well done to you. If you get one wrong, then you will be told to get a grip, because That is the namesake of this podcast. Anyway, so first question, we're going to talk about the fastest serve record on the men's ATP Tour. So if you can just give me the name of this individual, then you'll get all the points, or the point. But if you can tell me any other details, then absolutely fantastic. But you'll get them afterwards anyway.
Okay, so fastest serve on the men's ATP Tour.
Yeah.
I feel like I don't know
yeah.
if this is too obvious, but I'm going to go with Andy Roddick.
Get a grip. That is unfortunately not even close. So Andy Roddick has been known in the past to produce some excellent speedy serves, but on this occasion, the winner for the fastest serve on the men's ATP Tour is Sam Groth. Now, this is a player that isn't necessarily playing at the complete top 10, top 20 sort of level, but this was actually a record he stole from Ivo Karlovic. We all know Ivo Karlovic, the big brute that he is, smashing down serves. He and John Isner often compete in this regard. Alongside the likes of Anderson. But anyway, Sam Groth stole this record from Ivo Karlovic in 2012 in Busan, which is an ATP Challenger event. So obviously this isn't something we're going to hear about as much as we would with other things. But the speed, do you want to take a guess at where the speed is?
I'm going to say 160.
It's not a question for the 160.
Miles an hour.
Yeah, so he clocked it in at 163.4 miles per hour. So for anyone that's keeping track of this, the pretty much the standard first serve speed is going to be between 130 and 140 on the men's tour. That's first serve speed as well. Not even that.
Closer to like 120 probably.
Yeah, but I'm talking about those top numbers. You'll see between 130 and 140. And commentators will tell you that is a fast serve, but this is something else. Anyway, so we know that you've got 0 out of 1 so far, Ben.
Thank you.
Same question. I'm going to ask the same question, but for the women's tour. Okay. Can you give me the name of the individual who has the fastest serve on the women's tour? And if you can tell me the speed, then good luck to you.
It's not going to be another challenger thing, is it? Or you just curveball me? Is it fairly obvious? Because I think I know the answer, but it feels a bit obvious.
She was a very impressive player during her time. She's not currently playing on the singles tour, I believe, anymore, or not very much at least. But yes.
Ooh, that's interesting. I mean, I was going to go with Serena Williams, but that is not my answer now.
I will tell you that she is my favourite women's player that I've ever watched.
That doesn't help.
No, because I haven't told you who that is before.
Ooh, I really don't know, so I'm just going to go with Amelie Mauresmo.
Unfortunately, get a grip.
This is embarrassing.
The winner of this accolade is Sabine Lisicki. So the German has clocked her fastest serve in at 132 miles per hour, and this was in 2014 at the Bank of the West Classic. So it's interesting to see, obviously, that there is about a 30-mile-an-hour difference between the top speeds of the men's and the women's tours. That is a conversation for a completely other day, and one to be carefully trodden on.
I was going to rebuttal that, actually, but we can talk about that another time.
But it is an interesting perspective to take when we talk about tennis, but not in any way that's going to be criticised. It is just a fair point to make about sport of this type, and how it impacts the style of game and what you see, and also we can talk about some of the contentious topics that surround it.
Yeah, I'm quite impressed that it is Lisicki, actually, because if I remember correctly, she wasn't the tallest player around. She was strong, but. That shows you that technique does go a long way. But anyway, that's a topic for
absolutely. The size of your guns are absolutely not what determines power in tennis. But no, Sabine Lisicki was always my favourite tennis player on the tour, on the women's tour at least. It's sad that we don't really see much of her from now on. But unfortunately, my other favourite has also stopped playing as frequently, and that was Jeannie Bouchard, another Canadian.
Did you like
Anyway,
her for her tennis or for other reasons?
absolutely the tennis, Ben. Don't be disgusting.
That is the correct answer. At least someone's got an answer
Yeah, yeah.
correct so far.
Anyway, so we know you've got 0 out of 2. So now let's see if we can get something for the third question. So, who is the only player in history? I reckon you might get this. The only player in history, both from the men and women's tours, to win a golden Grand Slam. This is all 4 Grand Slams and Olympic gold in the same calendar year.
From either men or women. Okay.
So we know that it's not on the men's tour because
I know that.
Yeah.
Is this how recent is this? I need some help here.
It's not recent.
Okay, that's very vague. Is there kind of like a decade that you could at least
Pre-2000.
You're being very tight-lipped. I mean, I did give you some clues last week. You are really, really getting.
It's about the same level of clues as you gave me.
Let's go with Steffi Graf.
Yeah, and you've done it! Well done. That is an excellent answer. Yeah, it could only be Steffi Graf. Interestingly enough, this is why I didn't give you too much of a clue, because I thought this was a fairly well signposted question based on the impressiveness. It could only be Steffi Graf. She is also the only player to have won each of the 4 Grand Slams, 4 times or more. So she's won each Grand Slam 4 times or more, whereas no other player in history has ever done that.
She won each of them 4 times or more. Really?
Yeah. So she is the most consistent across all of the different courts.
Okay.
But anyway, well done. You've got 1 out of 3.
All right. At least draw.
So, fourth question. Now this is a contentious one, and I will give you a point if you can tell me one of the possible explanations. This isn't a clear-cut answer. This is not A or B, but it is of debate. So if you give me one of the 2 main speculations, you may get a point for this.
Okay, I didn't realise we were in English class.
Why is the score system in tennis the way it is? And when I talk about the score system, I'm talking 15, 30, 40, and game. So we're talking about a game score here.
Well, I think that you've spoken to me about this before.
I definitely have.
This is my way of basically hanging you out to dry if this is wrong. So wasn't it based on a clock face time initially? Is that close?
That is one of the 2 possible explanations. So well done. You get the question points. But this is more of a topic for discussion than anything else. Now, as you'll know, I like to talk about history a little bit from time to time. The origin of tennis is something that we're really not that sure of, and the origin of the score is even more shady. So obviously, the clock face idea was a touted suggestion. The idea that obviously at 1/4 past, 1/2 past, and 1/4 on a clock might be the inclination for the scoring in tennis. Obviously, this was suggested that 45, the 1/4 mark, was then changed to 40 at some time. Problem is, we know that something resembling tennis existed before the 1500s, and clock faces didn't exist until the 1500s, in Europe at least. As for anywhere else, it's not certain. So this is the standard clock face. We're not talking about sundials or anything like that. So the other possible example, and I personally, if I was going to be in a camp, I would be in this camp, is originally there was a game in France named Jeu de Paume. Now, Jeu de Paume basically means game of hands, and basically then there weren't any rackets. Rackets were introduced later, but players would basically play tennis with their hands, and each side of the net was 45 feet in length, so it's 90 feet in total. So every time you won a point, you would move 15 feet further forwards. However, 15 feet further forwards, 30 feet further forwards, wow, that is a nice tongue twister with Fs, and 40 was chosen because obviously 45 would have meant they were standing on the net. So 40 became it because then they were just in front of the net in that volley position for jeu de paume. So I reckon that's probably the most likely explanation. I can't talk anymore.
I mean, you are definitely a researcher. The amount of time you've put into researching these questions is just a little bit more than what I did. So I'll give you your credit there.
I'll tell you what, I didn't need to research that for today because it's something that is covered in a book called The Short History of Tennis. I will try and get the author's name and pop that in the comments at some point. It's a book that was given to me because obviously people know I like tennis as a present, but it's covered largely within that book, which is very, very useful. But no, it's interesting to know the origins of these things because it helps you gain an understanding of how the game has developed over the years. Forget the last 30 years and the Open era, for example. Over the hundreds of years, tennis has existed and has been enjoyed. So that's 2 out of 4. Very good. You've beaten my record. Let's see if you can get the 5th one. So we're going to go a little more technical now, and obviously to the recent developments within the game. So the grip of a tennis racket is an octagon. If anyone didn't know this already, why?
Oh my god. That is going to show me up here big time. Has it been octagonal in shape, even in the wooden racket era? Has it always been that way?
Yeah. Yeah. If you go back far enough, quite originally it was mostly octagonal in shape.
I need to give some kind of answer, but I don't know what to say.
That is correct. You do need to give some kind of answer.
I don't know, because... I don't know,
I'll give you a small clue. Nicely. I'll give you a small clue. That was going to be my clue.
Okay. Well, I don't know what else.
Think about what's the name of the thing we're discussing.
Yeah, handle.
Handle? I didn't say handle.
Or grip. Is that what you said? To make it... I don't know.
Hint.
To make it more... Like, that was the optimal shape for... fitting a hand, like in terms of grip and friction.
You're nearly there.
I've definitely got this wrong, so just tell me what it is.
Okay, so we'll leave you at 2 out of 5. So well done for your for beating me.
You had to add
1
a grip
point.
Question in, didn't you? Because it's called Get a Grip. Yeah. Well done.
Exactly.
You're so funny.
The final question had to be a bit of a pun based on the name of our podcast, but the reason for the octagonal grip is simply friction, is how good it made the grip of the grip, if that makes sense. So, quite simply, if you had a square grip, that would actually hurt your hand, especially if you're hitting lots of tennis balls all the time, because you'd have a lot of sharp edges. But if you had a circular grip, then you can imagine that if you're trying to use one of the determined grips with which we use for different shots in tennis, the continental, the semi-western, the eastern grips, then you wouldn't be able to hold it properly because it would slip around in your hand. So basically, it's just to increase friction. I would have taken increased grip as the answer if you would have said that, but nice and simple. In fact, if you go to a lot of science museums, especially the Toronto Science Museum, you can even test how strong your grip strength is on these little machines. It's just how hard you squeeze it. Like I say, everyone's got quite strong grip, but when something's hitting your hand, it's quite hard to readjust in that split second. So, like the octagonal grip is the optimal shape for that.
There you go. You learn something new every day. Not sure how useful that is for just general life, but it's something. I'll take it.
Absolutely.
All right, so 2 out of 5 then. So I've upped you by 1.
2 out of 5. Well done.
Time.
You've nudged me by 1.
Going forward, we will probably make it multiple choice, just so that we don't look completely idiotic. And I think 1 out of 5 and 2 out of 5 is not the kind of percentages we want to go for, really. We want to be pushing
No, not really. Not really.
Showing us up to be slightly fraudulent, given that we're doing a tennis podcast and we know relatively little about tennis.
It's the structure of the questions, isn't it? It's the structure of the questions.
Anyway, that wraps up for today's podcast. Thank you for listening, if anyone is actually listening, given that this is only the 2nd episode. And well done for putting up with our voices for so long. if you have even stayed this long.